thank you for joining today's not-for-profit speaker series. We're so glad to have you joining us. Welcome back to those who have been with us for the first couple of sessions. To those who might be joining us for the first time, thank you for finding us and welcome to this third session of this year's 2023 not-for-profit speaker series. I am Matthew Saha. I am the leader of our not-for-profit industry practice for Cherry Bekaert, and excited to have everybody here, continue to be inspired and humbled by all the efforts of our not-for-profit organizations who are tirelessly filling the gaps in our society with all the mission work that you do. And certainly we have an exciting topic today, something we get asked about a ton, which is the topic of cryptocurrency, kind of understanding it. What is it? What are some of the accounting considerations around cryptocurrency? What are some of the policies and procedures that need to be in place when thinking about crypto as well? So exciting topic for today. And before we get into introducing our speakers, I will just be, as usual, just going through a few housekeeping items with you. So before we get started, just note, we will be giving out CPE credit for those of you that need that. And in order to do that, we ask that you please remember to respond to at least 3 polling questions throughout this webinar. That's throughout the 50-minute presentation. Just FYI, there will be 5 total polling questions. So just watch for those to come up. We will give about a minute for everybody to respond. So you will have ample opportunity to answer 3 polling questions. The way you will get your CPE certificate will be through email, using the email that you registered with. We typically send that out within 10 days after the webinar is over. So look for your email for that. If you have any questions or didn't receive it, you can reach out to us at cbhlearning@cbh.com. Often we get asked, can I go back and look at this again? Yes, a recorded version will be available in about a week and posted to our website at the same place that you registered. If you have any questions, we ask that you ask them through the Q&A window on the tab. It's important to put them in the Q&A window as opposed to the chat tab. Q&A is where we'll be monitoring questions throughout. And the chat tab is more for chatting amongst yourselves. And then again, short survey will be sent out at the conclusion of this right away. As you sort of log off, we would be really pleased if you would fill out that survey for us and give us your feedback on any future topics that you want to hear from us on. So with that, I'm pleased to announce or introduce our speakers for the day, and very happy to have with us 2 of our audit professionals. So Amelia Crawford is an audit senior manager in our Raleigh office, and she works with a ton of not-for-profit organizations. Great to have Amelia. And then we also have Joe Schwartz, who is an audit partner in our financial sector. Joe works with a lot of investment companies out there who might not get into a ton of crypto, but Joe just seems to know a thing or 2 about cryptocurrency. So together, Amelia and Joe will be our presenters today, and look forward to all of their insights. And Joe, as I usually hand this off, I start with one of my dad jokes, which appropriately is, Joe, how do you get $1,000 worth of cryptocurrency?
How, Matthew?
Well, you buy $2,000 and then you wait a few days, right? So there's my joke. But anyway, off to you, Joe. Thank you for presenting.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. And thanks everyone for, thanks everyone for joining today. We're going to start off with our first poll question. So there you have it. Please take a moment to fill that out. And while you're looking at that, I just want to go over the course objectives for today. So we're going to be covering cryptocurrency at a high level. So if anyone's here is trying to get down into the nitty-gritties of crypto, or you want me to explain to you the underlying computer science or programming, that is not what we will be covering. So you can leave now. It's going to be pretty broad strokes. We're going to go over the GAAP current treatment of crypto and the GAAP future treatment of crypto. And then we're going to go over risks and rewards of accepting cryptocurrencies and some policies that non-for-profits should consider or have in place if they are holding cryptocurrency. And I'm just going to get, before I continue, I'm just going to give everyone a minute to fill out the polling results, and then I'll share those once we have it. Oh, look at that. So looks like some of our organizations are currently holding cryptocurrency, but the majority is not. It's just a resounding no. So yeah, good to know. Maybe after this course, you'll be more open to it, or maybe not. Maybe we'll push it in the opposite direction, and we'll get more to just the complete no's. Okay, so I'll start off. What is a cryptocurrency? A cryptocurrency, or some people call it digital assets, is a digital or virtual medium and exchange that uses cryptography for security. A cryptocurrency is difficult to counterfeit because the fact that it's based off cryptography or unique numbers for every single transactions, it's almost impossible to counterfeit. A defining feature of cryptocurrency, and probably the biggest allure that the crypto purists out there love, is that it's not governed by any central authority. So there's no central bank of any cryptocurrency. It's decentralized. Anyone can use it. Anyone can transfer money to anyone in any different country. There's no government interference or manipulation. That one of the use cases of cryptocurrency was when people were trying to get aid to folks in Ukraine and other places where they thought there could be government tampering. Cryptocurrency allowed people to do that. You could argue that's good. You could argue it's bad. I'm not here to get into that, but that's one of the unique aspects of cryptocurrency, that it doesn't have any governments putting their hands in it, at least at the time right now. And essentially, cryptocurrencies are I'll get into more detail, but in addition to being a currency, they're also a accounting system, or a general ledger, which is known as a blockchain. So every cryptocurrency is based is a chain, and in that chain there's unique transactions. So in addition to being a store of value, it's also an area that, if you use a block explorer or something that gives you transparency into the blockchain, it's an accounting ledger in addition to being a store of value. And like we said at the beginning of the presentation, feel free to throw questions in the Q&A. We'll try to get to them as I'm going, but don't be shy. Okay, so here's a history of cryptocurrency. So as you may have known, or maybe it's somewhat intuitive, the first cryptocurrency was Bitcoin. It was started in 2009 by an anonymous group of programmers called Satoshi Nakamoto. They actually don't really know who was the inventor of crypto. No one's come out and said, hey, I am Satoshi Nakamoto. It's pretty anonymous right now. So that's one of the interesting one interesting random fact on cryptocurrency. And then from 2009 to 2015, it was kind of a dull period. They called it well, some cryptocurrencies came on, some Bitcoin was the only one that really remained front and center. And then around 2015, Ethereum came, and Ethereum is probably the biggest altcoin. So if you ever hear the term altcoin, that's just an alternative coin. So anything that isn't Bitcoin, they call altcoin. And Ethereum was launched, and the unique part about Ethereum is that Bitcoin is really focused on being a currency or a store of value. Ethereum has this notion that on its blockchain, you can have smart contracts. And if you've ever seen NFTs, those, those apes with the various different pictures, or sometimes there's a lot like art people put on NFTs. That's the Ethereum's ability to store smart contracts on its blockchain. And to give an example of a smart contract, in addition to the NFTs, which are a little out there, to give a better example of smart contract versus regular contract, I'll start with a regular contract, right? If you have a lease on a car and the borrower stops paying that lease, well, the lender is going to ultimately apply fees, and then most likely, if they don't pay, take the car back. But it all takes time, and things could potentially fall between the cracks. With a smart contract arrangement or a DeFi, decentralized financing, if you lend someone Bitcoin, say you lend someone $1 million of Bitcoin, well, if you program into the smart contract that if the borrower misses one payment, then the money goes to the lender. Well, once that one payment is missed, it'll automatically be taken out of the person's account and given to the lender immediately. So the interesting, or the use case for these smart contracts is they're rule-based and they're automatic. And once something happens, it just is, X equals Y, it just goes. So that's one of the unique features of Ethereum. And there's many different use cases for it. Some of them are pretty wild, like real estate on blockchain, but I won't get too much further into that. Here's a snapshot of just like the top current cryptocurrencies in the US, or not in the US, in the world. Bitcoin obviously is the overwhelming largest cryptocurrency. It has double the market cap of any other cryptocurrency. And then there's Ethereum, which I just covered. Then there's Tether, that's Binance Coin BNB, and then USDC. And the interesting thing of 3 and 5, which I'll cover, these are what are called stable coins. So you'll see they're priced almost at $1. They should be at $1. And what a stable coin is it's something that's priced to peg another currency, or a fiat currency, which is like the US dollar. Some are pegged to track a commodity. And what those do is it allows you, like USD coin or USDC, it's pegged to the US dollar. It allows you to hold in your digital wallet a currency that is both a cryptocurrency and something that isn't going to be volatile. It's going to be stable. So that's a unique and interesting, another type of cryptocurrency that a lot of people will hold because of that feature. And one of the unique things of like USDC is actually that for every dollar that they have, or every token they have out there, they also keep a restricted cash account at a US bank, a trust account that has the same amount of US dollars in it, and it actually gets audited every month, I think, by Grant Thornton. So that's one unique thing that, it is a real store of value, the USDC. So that. And now I'll go, I've used some of these terminologies already, but I'll expound on them a little bit more. So these are some key terms in crypto. The first one is a block. Like I was saying at the beginning, how the fact that each cryptocurrency or chain is an accounting ledger. A block are data structures within the blockchain database where transactions are stored and permanently recorded. You can use tools like block explorers, and you can actually go and view the transactions, assuming you have the user's public address. So this is interesting, at least on the audit end, because if someone says, "Hey, we received $1 million of USDC. Okay, give me your public address." I go on the Block Explorer, I can actually see that $1 million come into your wallet, and it's there real time. So it's a pretty unique aspect of cryptocurrency, just how transparent it is. The other one is mining. You'll hear this term thrown out a lot. Mining is the process of where people actually validate the math problems or the underlying algorithms that are cryptocurrency, and then they get a reward. So for every single blockchain Bitcoin transaction that you validate, they'll give you a piece of Bitcoin. And people will have miners, and some people think of like miners as people. No, they're actually just servers. So if you hear someone has a Bitcoin mining operation, it's really just a warehouse or a room filled with all these different computers that are validating transactions. And then once they do that, they get a little reward in their digital wallet. The next three, I'm going to be covering a little bit more on each slide, on the subsequent slides, but they're fairly important, especially for people that may not be into cryptocurrency for you may just be doing it because you have to, like receiving it or just transacting in it, and it's probably not your primary business. But there's public address, which is that's the address where if someone wants to send you cryptocurrency, you have to give them that set of digits, and then they will send their cryptocurrency that they want you received to. The next one is private key. A private key is algorithmic code that's similar to a password, and it's used to authorize transactions. And the one kind of scary fact of a private key is that if you give away the private key, it's almost like giving away your cryptocurrency, because once you have that private key, there's no other validation that's necessary to do a cryptocurrency transaction. And I'll cover this later, but it's very important, the security of that private key. And then the last one is the crypto wallet. And the crypto wallet, or the digital wallet, is where you store your public and private keys. And this mechanism allows you to send, receive, and spend cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. All right, so now I'm going to cover a little bit more on custody and digital wallets. So typically when we think about custody and digital wallets, there's two main ways people do it. So there's either you don't use a third-party custodian, or you use a third-party custodian like Coinbase or Gemini or Fireblocks. And there's pros and cons to each. So let's go on the third-party custodian route, because that's probably what people are most familiar with, because that's, in the US at least, that's at least how most financial institutions are set up. So if you use a third-party custodian for your digital wallet, you open an account with Coinbase, and you transfer money from your bank account to Coinbase, and then in your Coinbase account, they'll keep your private key and your public key. And anytime you want to make a transaction, you tell Coinbase, and they validate the transaction or send money using that private key on your behalf. Which sounds all well and great, but the one issue with third-party custodians that people have, and it is alleviated, and I'll get to that in a second, is that the private key is then stored on the web. And there have been instances, because the private key is stored on a web, that unlike in, say, a traditional banking system, when there's a data breach, once they get that private key, they can steal or take the cryptocurrencies almost instantaneously. So I think the biggest one to date with KuCoin about 3 or 4 years back, where I think they stole hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's a real risk that you run if you use a third-party custodian. One feature that a lot of financial institutions have done, Coinbase has one, and there's a number of others, is and this is kind of like the gold standard of custody, is that it's called third-party cold storage, where there's two different types of wallets, and I know I'm getting a little technical here. This is probably the most technical I'll get. There's a hot wallet where I just said everything's kept on the web, and then there's a cold wallet, and that's when they download those private keys and they keep them on a computer or somewhere that it has no nexus to the web. So no one, even if there was a data breach, no one could get that information because it's not stored in anything that's connected to the web. So what some third parties will do is they will take your information, they will put it on a server that is not connected to the web, and then there'll be, whenever you want to use your cryptocurrency, there'll be like a multi-factor authentication process where they will have to, approve it via a callback or a text message or something. And then once they do that, they will then go into that server, take the private key, and then allow you to send or receive Bitcoin. So that's what the institutional players in cryptocurrency are currently doing. And I believe the SEC is going to require it for anyone that's a registered investment advisor in the near future. The other one that I didn't spend much time on yet is no third party. So this is, okay, I have cryptocurrency in a wallet, and I want to store it on my own computer, on my own server. There's mechanisms to do that. And the risk here is if you lose the computer or it gets stolen or your house burns down and it's not backed up, well, once you lose that information, it's gone forever and you'll never get it back. There's no like 1-800 number, I lost my private key. So a lot of money's actually been lost in that, because of that. So that is, the pro there is that there's very little security risk that someone will, hack or compromise the private key, but the con is that, it could be lost. All right, on to our next polling question. So do you have donors interested in donating in cryptocurrencies? I'm feeling like it's going to be a no based off the last one, but let's see where the results lie. And the good news is that if people are interested, we'll cover it later in the session. There are great platforms out there to allow you to do that. Oh, like I thought, no. All right. So, sorry, I keep skipping ahead on accident here. Let me switch back. So now I'll get into the really, really fun topic of cryptocurrency, which is the accounting for cryptocurrency. So outside of the custody risk, which I just covered, which the fact that it could get stolen, one of the trickiest issues companies have with cryptocurrency is the current accounting model, which is used for all entities outside of investment companies or funds, which was where I normally play. Funds and investment companies are actually allowed to treat cryptocurrency as an investment and hold them in fair value. However, everyone else that's an operating company or non-for-profit, they need to account for cryptocurrencies as intangible assets, which requires that they are initially recorded at cost, and then they're subject to impairment on a recurring basis. Usually it's based off your reporting period. So if you report quarterly, you look at it quarterly. If you report annually, you look at it annually. However, the impairment could be more frequent if there are circumstances that indicate that it's more likely that the asset is being impaired. So that's a little bit of an issue in the cryptocurrency because Bitcoin any cryptocurrency you have is extremely volatile. So if there's a huge swing in the market of cryptocurrency, one could make the argument that you could have to look at an impairment daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it may be. So that's one of the big issues that people are having right now with, if they're having cryptocurrency on their balance sheet, they don't really want to be taking all these impairment charges all the time, because if you're using that intangible accounting practice, once you impair it, you can never mark it up to the fair value unless you sell it. So there's only downside risk for the company with keeping cryptocurrencies on their balance sheet. The other thing that people have made the argument is, why can't we treat it as cash or cash equivalents? It is a currency. The AICPA and FASB have came out and said, no, it is not in currency. So that is another avenue that's been slammed closed by the regulators that govern those bodies. So right now, in the current standpoint, it is intangibles, which is a little bit crazy, but that's where we're at. And good news is, I'll get to it in a couple of slides, there is a new proposal that will hopefully change that up. So I already hit on this a little bit, but accounting considerations for non-for-profits. So non-for-profits generally follow the same accounting guidance as operating companies, that it's an intangible assets. However, if a non-for-profit is holding the cryptocurrency as an investment, then the crypto asset actually can be carried at fair value. And the probably main place that this is in endowments, especially some of the larger endowments. People have been holding cryptocurrency in there. I heard of one endowment that was, or a pension fund that was actually buying miners, the computers, and they were putting those into their endowment somehow. But if you do that, it can be carried at fair value, except there is some guidance for non-for-profits in the healthcare space that you need to look into the accounting guidance there. For whatever reason, they're not allowed to hold it at fair value. I won't go into the nitty-gritties of that. Lastly, if non-for-profits are accepting cryptocurrency as donations, I believe Amelia will cover that in a little bit. The current treatment is that you fair value the cryptocurrency on the date of the gift, just like you would with any other security. Okay, so recent updates are the current market, the current landscape of crypto accounting. So 2 months ago, or a little bit less than 2 months ago, FASB put out a proposed ASU, so it's not an ASU yet, still in the comment period, of accounting guidance specifically for certain crypto assets. The ASU will cover pretty much all entities in all industries outside of investment companies, because they're already marking it at fair value. And the proposed amendments will do just what investment companies have been doing, which is they allow the assets to be marked at fair value, and any changes in fair value recorded in current period earnings. Commissions, transaction fees, and other charges to acquire crypto assets would also be expensed as incurred. So this is good news. This is kind of what most of the stakeholders or companies in the space that have material cryptocurrency positions have been asking for. So it's a welcomed ASU from the industry. And the reason that being is the stakeholders have raised the concern to FASB that using the intangible asset model, it doesn't represent the economics of cryptocurrencies, and it makes it needlessly complex for companies to come up with accounting policies and for impairing the assets on a recurring basis. So yeah, it's very welcome, and hopefully we'll see it put into place soon. But right now it's just in the comment period, so It's subject to change. It's very readily easier to obtain. If you just go Google ASC 350-60, you can see a copy of the proposed ASU, and I think it should come over into guidance close to where they're proposing, but only time will tell. So that I'm going to kick it over to Amelia now. But like I said at the get-go, feel free to put in any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Joe. So now what we're going to look at is, if you want to advance to the next slide, is look at the benefits to accepting cryptocurrencies. So this is just looking at the not-for-profit organization actually accepting them as a donation. This is not looking at holding those. So the first is when you consider your donors, there is a tax benefit to the donors that we'll talk about in a couple slides to be able to donate an appreciated asset. So it does provide another kind of incentive to your donors to have the ability to donate a cryptocurrency. The other benefit is that there are platforms to use that can convert your cryptocurrencies into cash for use within your organization that will help mitigate kind of those risks of holding a cryptocurrency versus just accepting it as a form of donation. So we'll also go through what kind of platforms and ability you have to accept those. But both of these items kind of create an incentive and a way for you to be able to accept the donation if that's something your donors are interested in doing. So if we look at the next slide there, Joe. Ways to accept your cryptocurrencies. There's kind of two different methods that you can take. One is that you can actually accept the currency at your not-for-profit organization. So that's where somebody can donate the currency directly to your organization or process it through some kind of cryptocurrency exchange, like Joe mentioned. The risks there is obviously that your organization would be the one that would manage that transaction. And from the nonprofit's perspective, that also means you would be responsible for collecting the donor information so that you can have that proper reporting that you need to have done, which we'll talk through in a couple slides as well. They'll also be handling the security of your transaction, given that you'd be accessing your wallet to be able to directly receive that cryptocurrency. Now, to kind of offset that, there are ways that you can accept a currency without it coming directly to the nonprofit organization so that you can mitigate the risks that would be associated with that. The first is through what's called a payment processor platform. So when you hear that, think of things like the Giving Block or a similar organization. They're going to accept the currency on your behalf and convert that to cash for the organization for a fee that they charge. They provide an ability for you to put an embeddable button onto your site so that it's an easy way for donors to be able to donate. However, obviously that comes at a fee that will be charged as part of that conversion. The nice part is, though, that your organization doesn't have the risks that come with accepting a cryptocurrency. Instead, what comes directly to the organization is just the cash itself in that transaction. Another option would be through what's called a donor advised fund. And so essentially the donor would donate to the donor advised fund the cryptocurrency, and the not-for-profit would get basically a cash grant. And so it would be directed to your nonprofit organization, and it would be the same. You'd be getting that cash in, but not the cryptocurrency itself. So if we switch over to looking at the risks of holding.
Yeah, Amelia, one other thing on like the Giving Block and others that do the third-party platform, they also cover the KYC, so know your customer end. So you can be assured that you're not receiving cryptocurrency from, bad players.
Definitely worth mentioning. I believe they also help with tax filings and things like that as well. So it's a great kind of platform to use if you're just wanting to look at having that ability to share, to accept the cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, that's right. Filling out the tax forms for the donors. Much easier to have it go through them than you have to do all that legwork. I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the risks of holding a cryptocurrency. So this is looking at if you're actually going to be holding the assets at your organization. There's a few key things to keep in mind. One is obviously related to the volatility in the value of the cryptocurrencies. There can be a fluctuation that happens in their value, and we've kind of seen this in the crypto winter that's been happening, is that the value that it can be at one point in time can be significantly different than a value at another. And so just managing that risk when it comes to your organization is going to be an important part of holding a cryptocurrency. There is also obviously a lack of regulation because these are not regulated or issued by a central government. They're not governed by traditional financial institutions either. So any of those required practices that they would have in those industries, that does not apply to cryptocurrencies. And so what has happened is that there are times where there has been social engineering or misinformation, and that can directly end up affecting your value and the cryptocurrencies that you're holding. So it's just important to know the risks that come with that. You also have the ability for it to be stolen. As Joe mentioned, if your private key is obtained, then they could gain access to those assets, and it would be almost impossible to recover them. So it's important to note that you have to ensure that you have the proper security in place when it comes to holding them so that you're mitigating that risk that they could be stolen. And that's kind of where Joe talked about looking at a hot versus cold wallet. That can help mitigate that, but it definitely is something that you have to plan for and understand how you're holding the assets in order to properly combat that risk. And then obviously with the accounting that's currently in place, that's where it's being treated as that intangible asset. Now with things changing in the industry, that could obviously be shifted based on how this new ASU gets considered. But it's also important to consider with those that the accounting is not necessarily going to be at fair market value for this period of time. And so you could have that kind of disconnect in the picture being shown on your financial statements when they're captured as intangible assets. And that's where Joe was mentioning that you would have to record those losses, but you wouldn't be able to record the increases in the market value unless it was sold. So we'll switch now to the next polling question. Polling question number 3. So based on the benefits and risks, would your organization consider accepting cryptocurrencies? So perhaps you're looking at both accepting and holding, looking at only accepting them if they can get converted to cash for your organization, potentially looking at the future, look at accepting or holding those, or maybe you're just not convinced and it's a flat no for you. So we'll give everybody a minute to respond there. All right. So it looks like potential usage in the future, kind of what I expected, that a lot would want it to convert to cash. And that's where those platforms are extremely helpful. You don't have to hold the currency itself and deal with accepting that risk, but you can still have that ability for donors to make those donations and then be able to just have the cash in hand for the organization itself. All right. So one of the things we'll look at next is kind of the tax considerations. And this first part is going to be looking at it strictly from the perspective of the nonprofit organization. So the organization accepting the cryptocurrencies or the donations and having them converted to cash. So because they are treated as a non-financial asset, those donations have to be valued at the date of the donation. And you would need to determine the value at which to record the donation. The nice part is that if you're using one of those platforms that are going to convert it to cash, you have that value when you have that conversion happen. The key thing to remember, though, is that you need to record it at the gross donation and then separately record the fees that you're paying to that platform in order to convert it to cash. So you just need to make sure that you're not presenting the net effect as the donation value when really you want to capture those kind of separately. And so that way the donor is getting that right value when you're completing that transaction. And then obviously the nonprofit is the one that would need to determine that value to record the transaction. However, it's also important to note that you don't have to provide that back to the donor. So if it's something where you're accepting it directly to the organization, instead of having it converted to cash, you're still going to have to value that for your purposes, but you don't technically have to provide the value back to the donor. And we'll talk about from the donor perspective in a minute, because they do have some tax considerations as well when it comes to valuing that transaction. If you choose to hold the cryptocurrency, you can see here, there's really no additional tax considerations other than what Joe's mentioned as far as the accounting. It's really held similarly to any other investment that you would have at the organization. And then if we look at tax considerations to the donor, so the donation of this kind of asset means that the donor doesn't have to pay taxes on the appreciation and value. So that's what we were talking about as far as there's an incentive for the donor to donate a cryptocurrency because they have the value that they paid to obtain it. And then if it appreciated in value and they donated that asset, they don't have to pay taxes on that appreciation and value that happened. And so it can save them a lot of tax consideration if they just choose to donate it to your organization instead of, say, donating cash. And so if that's something that would be impactful to your donors, it can give a good incentive or a leg up to your organization for you to offer to be able to accept that. And like I said, you can use the platforms and have it convert to cash. It doesn't mean that you have to hold the cryptocurrencies, but it can give kind of that one up to other organizations and be able to get that donation if that's what the donor is looking to do. The IRS does classify it as property, which means that the donor would be required to have a qualified appraisal done. And this is where it can get a little bit tricky from a tax perspective for a donor, is that could be a difficult thing to do, as there's not necessarily a lot of appraisers of cryptocurrencies out there. So it is an important thing for donors to keep in mind when donating those assets, is that requirement to have the appraisal done falls at the donor level. So if you remember from the nonprofit level, you'll need to be able to have a value because that's how you're going to record the transaction, but you are not required to report that back to a donor. So from a donor perspective, they would be required to have that qualified appraisal done in order to value the donation. And if the cryptocurrency is over $5,000, there are some additional considerations from a tax perspective, both with the nonprofit and with the donor. So the donor would need to present the nonprofit with a Form 8283. The nonprofit would have to sign and certify that they've received the donation and really how they intend to use it. So Are they intending to use that property for an unrelated use or not? And that's because, as we mentioned earlier, the IRS does consider this property and not that cash or cash equivalent. Those forms are due 125 days after the donation. So it's important that you stay on top of those certifications and signing so that they can get properly filed. And then if the nonprofit were to sell the currency within 3 years, there's another form, that form 8282, that would be required to be completed. Now, all of these things, this is kind of what we had mentioned, that you may be able to get assistance through platforms like the Giving Block if you're utilizing them to do the tax filings as well. So that could really lessen the burden on the nonprofit organization. But it's important to know, what the requirements are so that if you move into this space, you're aware of what needs to be done in connection with that. And then finally, it's important to think about the policies that you need to have in place at your organization before you start holding or accepting any of these cryptocurrencies. The first to consider would be a non-standard gift policy. So there is already a best practice with your Form 990 that if you're getting non-cash gifts of $25,000 or more, to have this non-standard gift policy in place. If this isn't something that your organization already has, it's a good thing to put in place to kind of talk about how you will utilize those. Will you use them in the state they are donated? Are you converting them? This will also help. You may remember last year you had new standards that had to get implemented regarding in-kind contributions. These can all kind of add that clarity that your organization needs for what do you do with these non-cash gifts if they are received by the organization. So are you converting them to cash? Are you utilizing them? Things like that. If you're holding cryptocurrencies, that's where you're going to want to look at a few more different policies to put into place. One would be obviously an investment policy. And that's really where you're going to be monitoring your risk and how you're mitigating that risk when holding a cryptocurrency. So if you have things like endowments in place already, you may already have kind of a leverage model that you follow so that you mitigate any risk to your organization. You would want to have a consideration for cryptocurrency as well with that, so that you're mitigating any kind of risk as far as over investing in that kind of area if you deem it as a higher risk investment. And then you also need to look at your internal controls, including specific controls related to your private keys. And that comes back to that wallet that's holding those cryptocurrencies, and how are you protecting those private keys so that you can ensure that those are not easily stolen, either within the organization or outside of the organization, so that you're really monitoring the risk that you have in holding those assets. So then we'll move to polling question number 4. And does your organization's existing policies and controls cover cryptocurrencies? So give you 1 minute to kind of wrap up the questions. All right, so it looks like the predominant answer is no. So definitely for those considering it, it should be something that you kind of line up and get into place before entering that market. So you're fully prepared as far as accepting or holding cryptocurrencies. And with that, we can open it up to any remaining questions you may all have. And Matthew, I think we can pass it back to you as well.
Thank you, Amelia, and thank you, Joe, so much. One last polling question being launched out there. Just let us know if you'd like to like us to get in touch with you on this topic or any others that you might want to discuss. There was one last question just about taxability of appreciated crypto, which I believe, Amelia, in your slides, you said there was a tax avoidance strategy for donating appreciated cryptocurrency. So there was a clarification on that. But Carla, if we got something wrong, we'll look at your question there and get right back to you. So the session is at an end. I just want to remind everybody, and thank you for joining us. Remind me, this short survey will be sent out right after we close out of this. Continue to check our registration site for upcoming sessions. The next one, you'll be stuck with me on May 10th, talking about a refresher on accounting for contributions and grants. And we field a lot of questions about that very often. So it's good to have an annual refresher on how to account for contributions and grants. So we look forward to going through that session with all of you. So with that, we'll close out the session. Thank you again to Amelia and Joe for all your time and effort putting this together. So thank you.